This is a very critical time of year for collecting data. And like I said at the start of the stream, it almost pains me because I've been sitting inside mostly during autumn and winter and doing what work I can there. And now the spring's here and I'd be out surveying butterflies, surveying moths, and I can't really do that. I can do that in my garden. I can do that when I go on my walks. But do we know how this is affecting wildlife conservation regionally in the UK and around the globe?
I don't think we'll know really for years until people can go out and collect data now. In terms of conservation science and ecological science, you're right that there will be a big impact there. You know, we have these long-term data sets that based on data that's collected year after year after year, and because of that, we often have a really fantastic, really impressive understanding of the ecology of Britain and Western industrialized countries. And that research is going to be disrupted. You know, lots of those long-term data sets will have just a big gap, a year's gap in them, which is really distressing. I think on a global level, I think in Britain we probably won't be too badly affected, but on a global level, I think this pandemic and the lockdown that's associated with it are going to be absolutely catastrophic for biodiversity worldwide, unfortunately. And I wrote something about this in on a site called the Conversation. So if you look up the Conversation, 2 days ago, I wrote an article about this. And I think it's going to be catastrophic for conservation for a number of reasons, but particularly in the tropical world. And that's because, you know, in our societies, in our industrialized societies, we're really lucky in that, you know, we live in a welfare state and the government looks after us. So we have these social safety nets. So, you know, right now, the government is guaranteeing through their furlough scheme, they're guaranteeing 80% of the income of anyone that can't work. And that means, you know, if because of this disaster you find yourself unable to work, you've lost your source of income, then it's okay, the government is still going to look after you. In the majority world, in tropical developing countries where most biodiversity is, these are poor countries, and the government isn't able to look after its citizens that way. And what happens, so I lived for 10 years in Madagascar, and I carried out a lot of research on human-nature interactions in Madagascar. And what I found there is that wildlife acts as a safety net. So, for example, yeah, most people that live in the countryside in Madagascar, they're farmers. They don't want to chop the forest. They don't want to hunt animals. They just want to farm. What happens with climate change is it's changing all the rainy season, so they can't farm anymore. So they lose their source of income. And when they have nothing else that they can do to earn any money, they head to the forest, because you can always find something in the forest that you can sell or eat. So if you've got nothing else, you can go there. And of course, you know, you don't need an education or a fancy degree. You might need an education to be able to get a job. You don't need an education to be able to exploit wildlife. Anyone can, you know, wield an axe. So my really big concern is that right now in countries around the world, there are millions of people that are losing their jobs or losing their sources of income. And we know that there's a mass exodus from cities to rural areas. So people that live in cities, in tropical cities, are leaving to go back to, you know, the villages they grew up in their millions. But what are they going to do when they get there? They can't farm because all the best farmland is taken by everyone else. The government's not sending them a check. I think that they will depend more and more on the safety net of natural resources. They will go to the sea to fish or go to the forest to exploit to exploit natural resources. So I'm sure that because of the economic downturn, there's going to be many, many more people exploiting wildlife than before. Now, at the same time, there's going to be much less surveillance and protection of that wildlife. Now, one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic on wildlife, I think, is going to be the end of the shutdown of tourism, the shutdown of wildlife tourism around the world, and especially in poor countries that are rich in wildlife. So, for example, take a protected area, take a park or a reserve in Southern Africa, in Botswana or Zimbabwe or somewhere. Now, imagine that you live next to that park. And it's very easy for us to be really appreciative of elephants and lions and all the rest of it. But if you're a poor villager that lives next to a park, you have to pay some of the costs of living with those animals. Sometimes, you might have an elephant that comes and raids your crops in the night, and that's your whole income for the year gone. Or you might, if you're a goat herder, you might have some jackals take some of your goats, and lions and elephants kill people too. So people that live around parks have this sort of uneasy coexistence with these animals. But the reason that they tolerate these animals is because they get some income from tourism. It's because foreigners like us come and visit these places, spend money in hotels and stuff, pay park entrance fees, and some of that money, not enough of it, but some of that money goes back to the villagers that live around it. And because of that, because people receive some benefits from the wildlife, then they're prepared to tolerate and put up with it and deal with the occasional crop raiding or whatever. What's happening now is people aren't visiting those parks anymore, so that income has dried up, and I'm really worried that people will still be happy to tolerate living with dangerous wildlife if they're not getting any financial benefit from it. So I'm really concerned, to be honest.
I think that's a very interesting angle, because I think the point of view that many people have is that due to this lockdown, the environment might benefit. And I mean, in terms of like planes not flying, they're one of the biggest contributors towards greenhouse gases. Yeah, that's the case. But with biodiversity, it's not the same. And I think especially within this country, what you were saying about individuals tolerating that wildlife because it can be disastrous if you're a farmer and so forth, or even be threatening. I mean, we're a country that really didn't tolerate wildlife. I mean, we're one of the, if not the most nature depleted country in the world. So it's a very interesting comparison to us. Okay, well, economically, the government's going to be able to support us potentially, but for those other countries that are more biodiverse but don't have that support, will be inflicted. And that's a really interesting point of view to have. I think, yeah, sorry.
So I just wanted to say a couple of other things about, so I don't want to be too negative. And I think there are other ways that I think the lockdown is going to really benefit biodiversity in our wildlife in Britain too. One of them is roadkill. So I don't know about you, but I see so many dead badgers on the roads when I'm driving about. Dead roe deer, dead badgers. All right, some of the things that are killed are not native species, like muntjac and pheasants and things. But still nobody likes to see wild animals like dead on the road. And to be honest, I haven't read the research. There must be lots of research, but for some species, vehicle collisions are a major source of mortality. So, and especially I imagine in the springtime when you have youngsters that aren't so
adapted,
streetwise and savvy. So I think that's the case. Another thing that I've heard being said is I don't know if you heard, but there's been a lot of talk amongst pet owners about whether cats can carry the virus, and even if they don't get sick themselves, they can possibly transmit it. And there's been some veterinary advice for people to keep their cats indoors. And honestly, there are few things that could be better for wildlife in Britain than cat owners keeping their cats indoors.
It's like, why are all these songbirds? There seems to be more songbirds appearing everywhere.
That's
I
it.
wonder
That's
why
what
that is. And I mean, this is the thing. It's a really interesting because I mean, I've done some work on invasive species, which can do a lot of damage, whether it's like the red claw crayfish we have in this country or the American mink, and then like things like cats almost get overlooked sometimes. And I think just to go back to the point, everyone's like the worst. It's like the worst idea to talk badly about cats on the internet, I think. So, we love cats. Don't get us wrong. The big cats are great. But the what you were saying about the roadkill situation, because I mean, I know in Spain, they've got the lynx there, which are very endangered, I think critically endangered even, and roads actually fragment their territory. So it'd be really interesting to see what some of the data is supporting on like Eurasian wolves and the lynx, I think it's the Iberian lynx they have in Spain, because I know roads are a huge issue, and we might actually see badgers get a bit revitalized. Obviously the cull has been postponed, I believe, like the badger culls stopped, which was incredible news to hear. But a really interesting study I was reading last year was that badgers, badger road collisions started going up because of GPS becoming more accessible, because people were using roads that they wouldn't normally use. So there'd be these badgers and all these wildlife crossing through like these weaving roads throughout the countryside, and it would never be an issue. And then suddenly there was more roadkills by that. So I thought that was a really interesting comparison.